99.1 The Sports Animal. I'm Vince Ferrara. Excited to talk some NFL draft because it is pretty much the main thing going on in sports right now, although Dana White would argue with that. He's got MMA going, and we'll talk about that in another day. But excited to bring in our next guest that we've had the fortune to talk to in the past. He's a terrific broadcaster for the NFL Network, and you can follow him on Twitter at Wyche. That's WYCHE 89. He's an NFL Network reporter, and you can follow him and see all his work leading up to the draft, beyond it, and all year round. Steve Wyche joins us here on the Sports Animal. Steve, Vince in Knoxville, how are you, sir?
I don't think I'm doing as good as you because I'm not rocking the floral Hawaiian shirt like you. So I think things are really good in Knoxville. But no, things are well. My family and I are healthy. We're doing our part, as are most folks here out in LA. So, no, I think things are well. Very fortunate and just very thankful for all the healthcare workers and who are facing this head on, and all the people who are helping us at supermarkets and places like that, so we can try to live the best we can while they are, again, putting themselves kind of on the front lines of all of this.
No doubt. Echo those thoughts for sure. So you've obviously been tracking this and how the NFL is handling this period of time of uncharted territory, and then the draft is going to continue. Give us sort of an insight on how you think this is going to go off with everyone being remote and outside of their facilities.
Yeah, I mean, as you've seen the reports, Roger Goodell is going to be announcing the picks from his house. Every team, a representative from each team is going to be making the picks from his or her living room or war room in their house or their designated area. So you're going to have that aspect of it. So, you've heard all the concerns where some teams are like, well, hey, we could get hacked because this is a remote, kind of virtual type of draft. Legitimate concerns. The league is trying to reassure them that that's not going to happen. If there's a trade, they may be asking for more time just because of potential technical issues. But I don't think that's a big of a deal because when trades have gone down before, they're happening via conference call or via phone call anyway. So I don't think that's as much of a concern as people are making it out to be. But then, to make it a television production, there are going to be cameras in players' homes or wherever they are going to be with their families for the draft. So going to be a whole lot of technical stuff that I don't know about that's going to happen on the TV side of things. But just overall, I think it's going to, look, there may be a glitch here or there, but I think they're going to do test runs and things like that to make it as entertaining as possible. Because as you mentioned, this is kind of it right now for sports with no games being played. And things like that. So I think this is going to be something that will be highly viewed, highly reviewed. It's going to be highly anticipated as usual. So just a very interesting time. But I think the league and everybody is going to make sure that they try to goes off without any technical glitches.
Steve Wyche from the NFL Network reporter, joining us here on 99.1 The Sports Animal. I'm Vince Ferrara. So because of the setup for the draft, do you think we're going to see more trades, same amount, less trades because of the setup? How do you think the trade aspect will work in the first round?
Yeah, the trade, that's not going to affect anything. I mean, there's still going to be trades. And we've seen the last couple of years, it's been very active on the trade market. We're seeing teams that have multiple picks, like the 49ers and the Dolphins and the Raiders, in the first round. So there's going to be movement. And like I said before, in the past, all these happen with phone calls behind the scenes. So I think that part's going to remain the same. So I don't think this situation is going to impact necessarily the desire to make trades. I think it's going to be the only concern is the execution because of some of the potential technical issues because things are going to be virtual as opposed to whatever. But you can always pick up the phone and use things that way, the way they've always done it in the past.
In your opinion, how much are teams missing this pre-draft process since the combine in getting as much information, cross-checking all that they normally would do?
To some degree. They're doing virtual interviews with players. They're putting them on whiteboards or they're asking them film breakdown type of things. They're getting to interview them at length about personal types of things. But look, there's nothing like being face-to-face with somebody. I mean, body language, eye contact, things like that. They can put you under a different type of, meet the Fockers type of interview if they can do it in person. But I don't think it's necessarily that radical. I think, because, again, these in-person interviews are not workouts. when these players go to team facilities. But I do think it's going to hurt the smaller school players who didn't get opportunities to have pro days and to get seen and things like that. So you might have fewer players from smaller schools taken and signed as undrafted free agents, and more players from larger schools who've played larger competition, potential, the sure thing type of acquisitions in the later rounds, again, as opposed to some of the smaller school guys. I mean, I think those are the ones who will be impacted.
Do you think that bigger school lean on the more known commodity that will be reflected in the first round as well?
No, I mean, first round is not going to be adjusted. These guys have been scouted from the time they've been sophomores and juniors. I mean, we know that who Joe Burrow is, right? We know who Chase Young is, and Tua Tagovailoa, and these players are. They've established themselves. It's going to be these guys in the middle rounds and the later rounds. And again, most of these scouts have done the work. This is the teams that are going to do well in this draft are the teams that have deep and experienced scouting departments, right? So they can guys who've been at it for years, so they can call their sources at their universities and in these communities and say, tell me the real deal about this guy. Mm-hmm. The teams that are going to struggle are the ones who don't have experienced scouts, who don't have the contacts. Because everyone can evaluate the players on film the way they want to evaluate them to fit their schemes and systems. But it's the personal information, the character checks. That's where these experienced scouting departments are really going to come out ahead.
Steve, how wide is the range of the scouting departments that are staffed throughout the NFL? Do some have half of others? What kind of personnel numbers are we talking about, do you think, in the NFL?
Great point. Look, you've got some teams that have these very extensive scouting networks. Every team's got area scouts. They've got scouts out in the West and South and Midwest and Northeast. But some of these teams have a lot of people in the building. Some of these teams have, general managers, assistant GMs who used to be those worker bees, right? Who've got people on the ground. And those are the teams that are going to work. Hey, if somebody's got someone in Southeast Alabama who they can trust or who they used to scout with, who they can really trust, they're going to get the information. Whereas some teams, remember the Bengals, they used to have one of the smallest scouting departments in the NFL. I mean, coaches were doing a lot of the scouting on film after the season was over. So, I mean, it's teams like that don't prioritize scouting or who might use more data gathering as opposed to on-site, on-field visual type of just scouting football players. Those are the teams that could really, be at a disadvantage, so to speak, when you're comparing how a player does in down and distance situations, as opposed to seeing how that player does in down and distance situations.
It's interesting you mentioned the Bengals because really they were really the team that I thought of when you were talking about the scouting department and notorious for it. So we're visiting with Steve Wyche from the NFL Network here on 99.1 The Sports Animal. 30-minute editions of NFL Total Access. You can find them Monday through Friday, 7 p.m. on the NFL Network. So Steve, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of the Tennessee guys in the draft. Darrell Taylor probably is the guy that we've seen the highest on some mock drafts, that rush end. And then also Jawan Jennings is a highly discussed, and there's a variance for him as a wide receiver. Marquez Callaway. There's a number of others that I guess could potentially be free agents. Dominic Wood-Anderson, Daniel Batuli, Nigel Warrior. Any thoughts on any of those Tennessee guys for the draft?
Well, first off, I am not Dana Jeremiah or Bucky Brooks, right? I am not a scout. I'm not a talent evaluator. So I speak to teams, and the one thing that's interesting, we have, you hear about the glut of the Chase Youngs of the world, the chasing down at LSU. Some of these guys who are the pass rushers in the first round, you're not necessarily seeing outside the top two or three. Kind of the impact pass rushers, at least in the eyes of NFL teams, that you've seen in previous drafts. This is a big wide receiver draft. We know there are quarterbacks there, but the interior defensive lineman seems like that's where a lot of teams are going to go. So those guys from Tennessee, I mean, the edge rusher from Tennessee, he's somebody, if he doesn't go in the first round, I mean, somebody may get a steal in the middle rounds because, again, that's where just kind of the impact of some of these pass rushers are right now. Not in part because of what they could do or what they've done, but because of other positions like wide receiver, we could see 7 or 8 of these guys go in the first round. Players like that in the offensive lineman, a lot of those guys go in the first round as opposed to this being a heavy dominant pass rusher, even defensive back. You're not hearing about a ton of DBs going in the first round either. So those guys are going to get pushed to the second and third days, and that's just where it is. It's kind of an unusual year for Tennessee. I mean, I know the past couple of years they've had a couple of guys go, but man, I just remember the days when they used to flood the NFL with first and second round draft picks. Kind of goes to where the state of where that program is right now.
Steve Wyche for the NFL Network joining us here on 99.1 The Sports Animal. So where do you stand on the risk reward and what could be a bad look if you miss on him and he works out of Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama?
This is the ultimate two-tiered, dual-pronged. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Right.
Because right now we've heard the medical reports are very good. And, I speak to Tua. I'm very tight with that camp. And again, everything looks very good. Okay, so let's say you're the Dolphins at 5, the Chargers at 6. First off, do you trade up to get them? You might not have to, right? It looks like the first 4 picks, they're going to fall in line. Burrow, Chase Young, maybe Jeff Okudah to the Lions. And then the Giants, you don't know necessarily what they're going to do, but probably they're going to go offensive line. So do you trade up to get him? Maybe, maybe not, if you really want him. If you think he's healthy, he says he can come in and compete. If he's going to be your guy, you still have a bridge quarterback. All these teams that need quarterbacks have a bridge quarterback right now just to come in and get him acclimated, which is important because he's not going to have an offseason to work with a team based on this pandemic we have going on right now. Mm-hmm. The bigger question is if you think he is going to be durable, right? If 4 years from now, all of a sudden you see something degenerative in those medical reports, is he going to be the guy you can hang your hat on for 10 or 15 years? At the same time, if you do not draft him, let's say the Dolphins pass on him and they take Herbert, he goes to the Chargers and has a great career, and Herbert doesn't. Now you're looking at a Bear situation where Mitchell Trubisky has not worked out and they passed on Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes. That gets people fired, okay? And that's where, again, the damned if you do and damned if you don't. You know how good Tua is. If you draft him, you may be taking the medical risk. If you don't draft him, you could be taking a job security risk.
It is fascinating, and it's obviously the quarterbacks have been talked about the most, especially that Tua situation. But have you – might have been Rex Ryan, I guess, that trotted out that this is the biggest risk in NFL draft history. Are we talking about that kind of level?
I don't know if it's the biggest risk in draft history. I mean, it's because of the medical issue and because of this pandemic, team doctors can't get their hands on them individually, even though his most recent exam was done by the Titans doctor, Thomas Bird, who's a hip specialist. That information was shared. He's highly respected. Teams were able to kind of give their input on some of the things they wanted to look for, and teams did get their hands on him at the combine. But again, that was in February. He was not at the health status that he is now. He's evolved. He's grown. Look, it's always a risk drafting a quarterback. I mean, was it any bigger risk than taking a Christian Ponder? Was somebody that people didn't think was going to be a top 15 quarterback, and he was, or a Blaine Gabbert, or some of these other quarterbacks, Jamarcus Russell. The only thing is you've got the medical, and you have it and you don't. You know that there's a medical issue. But you know what? The Miami Dolphins thought that Drew Brees had a medical issue in his shoulder, so they went with Dante Culpepper a couple of years ago. How'd that work out?
Yeah.
So to say this is the biggest risk, I'm not quite so sure that this is the biggest risk in draft history, but it's one in recent history that would be noteworthy whether it works out or not.
Steve, as you know, a lot of people being there in LA, a lot of people have connected a Cam Newton or a Jameis Winston with the Chargers. Why would they do that if they're very likely to take a quarterback at number 6?
Well, the Chargers have already said they're not going back into free agency. They really, Anthony Lynn really likes Tyrod Taylor, the current quarterback. He had him in Buffalo. We all know he is a starting caliber quarterback, even though people say he can only take a team so far. But again, if they've got to go a season or a half season with him as a starter, that's fine. They do not want to bring Cam Newton in. They've just kind of made that clear. It's weird. Cam Newton is interesting to me because, speaking to people around the league, there's not that many starting jobs open right now, for one. And then two, if you bring him in to be a backup or to compete, Cam is a big presence, right? He is, some people see him dressing, a certain way and don't like it. He's got a big personality. To me, a team like the Jaguars, okay, if Gardner Minshew's your guy, well, bring Cam Newton in. That coaching staff is on the green mile right now, and that personnel staff. They're going to get fired if they don't win ball games this year. Bring Cam Newton in. He immediately makes your team better in a division that's very, very interesting with Phillip Rivers coming to the Colts. We know the Titans where they were last year, and then the Texans trading away DeAndre Hopkins. So to me, if you bring Cam Newton there, that's a winning situation. And the Chicago Bears, I know they just traded for Nick Foles, but what's the harm in bringing in Cam Newton as well? Cam knows he's not going to get the big contract. He's not a desired guy. But if he is healthy, he's one of the best players in the NFL. The health issue is the big scare. Teams can't get their hands on him right now to look at that foot and shoulder where he's had surgeries. But at the same time, free agent contracts are not binding until you pass a physical. So you can sign him right now. If he fails the physical, you're no worse off than you are now. If you get the rights to him right now and he succeeds, then you could have your starting quarterback.
Last couple things with you, Steve. Really appreciate your time. We're in Tennessee. A lot of Titans fans here in East Tennessee and that listen to us in the mid-state. Just a quick thought on the offseason for the Titans.
They're going to be right there. I mean, the big question for them is, they committed to Ryan Tannehill. Mm-hmm. And they really believe in him. I think he showed them some things in 2/3 of a season last year that he's a fit for their scheme. But can he do it? Did he have on a glass slipper? Or is he someone who can continue doing what they do? Can Derrick Henry continue doing what he does? I mean, it's hard to, for running backs to have those types of years back to back to back, kind of like Derrick Henry has done. So, again, they stuck with the nucleus of their team. They lose a guy like Jarrell Casey. Wow. I mean, he's a fantastic player. So maybe that's where they're going in the first round of the draft. We saw, the 49ers also trade away DeForest Buckner, who's just a monster. So that tips you to where they're probably going in the draft as well. As for financial issues, I think both players were traded away. But I think the Titans are right there. It's just, to me, it's a division that's top to bottom. Well, the Jaguars, I don't know, but the top three teams could all win it, but they all have so many question marks with some of the things that were done this offseason that you just don't know what the best team will be, which is why it's going to be a great division to watch. But I really love the Titans. I loved them last year, even when Mariota was the starter, and I really liked them going into the season.
Question marks like trading DeAndre Hopkins.
Oh my God! Oh God!
Yeah, we don't. I think we know where we all stand on that one. So
yeah, I'm sure Deshaun Watson's happy about that.
Yeah, that turns over some other problems potentially for them in the future. All right, yes. Steve, I try to do with our interviews some fun stuff here at the end. So I got 3 things I want to ask you about. It's the 3 for V. So I want to ask you what room you're in. Do you have a dog nearby that can hop on the video with us? And tell me about the last time you were in Knoxville, if ever.
Okay, I am in my kitchen.
Okay.
I do not have a dog or any pet. Our fish died recently.
Oh, sorry about
that. And the last time I was in Knoxville, I was with Charles Davis, and we were there, the former volunteer who's a broadcaster now, and we were there for Eric Berry's Pro Day. So that was several years ago. So haven't been there in a while, but there you go. You got answers to your questions.
Very good. It doesn't get any better in terms of human beings than Charles Davis. We talk to him all the time, yeah. No doubt. Well, Steve, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Always great to catch up with you. Of course, once again, 30-minute editions of NFL Total Access Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock on the NFL Network. And you can follow NFL Network reporter Steve Wyche on Twitter as well, at Wyche, WYCHE 89. Steve Wyche, NFL Network. Steve, be safe, be healthy, you and your family. Thanks so much, and we'll look for you on the NFL Network.
You too. Thanks a lot, Vince.
All right, thanks. That is Steve Wyche joining us here on 99.1, the Sports Animal.